My name is Autumn Monroe. I'm 48 years old, and until yesterday evening, I was the Director of Ethics and Compliance at Vernaxa Health Systems. I had given 25 years of my life to that place, late nights, weekends, missed birthdays, and more than a few personal sacrifices. I believed in the mission, in the idea that healthcare should be driven by principle, not profit. I stayed through mergers, leadership overhauls, and 3 economic downturns. I was 12 hours away from receiving my full pension, $2.2 million. Then my badge stopped working. I remember the sound, just a soft beep when I tried to access the elevator to the executive floor. One second I was a trusted leader, and the next I was just locked out. At first I thought it was a system error. I waved at the receptionist like everything was normal and tried another door. Same result. That's when Marcus from security came over. He didn't look me in the eye. He asked me to come with him. I didn't argue. I could feel something was off, something carefully staged. We walked in silence through a hallway I had helped design during a renovation 4 years earlier. It still had the calming seafoam walls I'd fought for to help staff feel less stressed. Strange what details you notice when your world is falling apart. In a small office near HR, a woman I didn't recognize was waiting. She read from a script. It was short. My role was no longer needed, effective immediately. I was asked to surrender my laptop, phone, and ID card. No explanation beyond that. No thanks for 25 years. No offer of transition. No meeting. Just protocol. I remember how cold the room felt, like every ounce of warmth had been vacuumed out. I handed over my things one at a time. I didn't cry. I didn't ask why. I knew I wouldn't get a real answer. It was deliberate, planned, executed down to the minute. They walked me out through the side lobby, not the main one. They didn't want anyone to see. But someone did. A junior analyst named Carla saw me from the mezzanine. Her eyes were wide. I gave her a nod. I had mentored her last year during a regulatory audit, taught her to speak up even when it was uncomfortable. I hoped she remembered that. The glass doors shut behind me with a soft hiss. I stood outside, staring at the reflection of a woman I barely recognized. Autumn Monroe, former director. No job, no pension, no explanation. 12 hours too early. I got in my car, hands shaking, mind blank. I didn't drive right away. I just sat there. I kept thinking, why now? Why like this? But deep down, I already knew. This wasn't a mistake. It was a move. They assumed I wouldn't fight. They were wrong. The box they handed me was small, barely large enough to hold the company-issued laptop, my phone, and a few personal items from my desk. I placed the devices inside one at a time, careful not to show the weight I felt in my chest. Each handoff felt like a subtraction, like someone quietly peeling away pieces of my identity. The phone still had messages I hadn't returned. The laptop held 2 decades of work policy drafts, training slides, and audit trails I had reviewed down to the comma. I'd logged into that system more than 10,000 times. Now I was locked out, just another name in a spreadsheet flagged for removal. I slid my badge across the table last. It was heavier than I remembered, or maybe I was just noticing it for the first time. The photo on it was 10 years old. I looked so certain in that picture. I think that's what stung the most, how sure I had once been that I belonged here. Marcus the guard kept glancing at the clock. He wasn't cruel, just uncomfortable. We'd once shared coffee during late-night security checks. Now he couldn't meet my eyes. I didn't blame him. This wasn't his decision. As we walked toward the side exit, I passed by familiar walls lined with posters about integrity and accountability. I had helped write those. My office was still upstairs, probably untouched, still holding the blue ceramic mug my niece had made me. I wondered if they'd toss it. The air in the hallway was still cold like always. I used to joke that it was kept that way to preserve the executives. Today, I barely felt it. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same. That was the cruelest part. You imagine betrayal as loud and dramatic, but it can be quiet, methodical, almost polite. When we reached the glass door, Marcus paused and pressed the unlock button. I stepped outside into late afternoon light that felt foreign. The hum of the city was steady, indifferent. Behind me, the doors slid shut without a sound. That was it. 25 years reduced to a silent exit and a cardboard box. I didn't turn back. Not because I wasn't tempted, but because I knew the place I thought I had belonged no longer existed. At least not for me. I hadn't even taken off my coat when the email came through. It landed in my personal inbox with the subject line, "Severance Agreement and Confidentiality Terms." I opened it out of instinct, still running on habit, expecting logistics or maybe some vague acknowledgement of service. But what I saw made my stomach tighten. The document was short, clinical, 6 months' salary in exchange for silence. Silence is not just about the reason for my departure, but about any internal matters at Vernaxa, including regulatory concerns, financial data, and leadership behavior. Paragraph 7 spelled it out with ruthless precision. I would forfeit all remaining retirement benefits if I spoke to the press, a lawyer, or most importantly, any regulatory body. That's when it clicked. This wasn't just a termination. It was a muzzle. They hadn't let me go to save costs or streamline departments. They had fired me with surgical timing 12 hours before my pension vested, and now they were trying to buy my silence at a discount. They knew what I knew, or at least suspected it. That's why they were moving so fast. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling, letting the wave of realization settle in. It had started months ago, slowly. Meetings I was excluded from, reports I was told not to review, a new structure that sent financial data around my team instead of through it. At the time, I told myself it was just growing pains. A new CEO with a different style. But now, I saw it clearly. Jeff Lang didn't want ethics. He wanted obedience. The company I had helped build was gone, replaced by something slicker, colder, more concerned with public image than patient care. And I was no longer a gatekeeper. I had become a liability. I closed the laptop without reading the rest of the document. My heart was pounding, but my face felt calm. Rage doesn't always look like shouting. Sometimes it looks like someone sitting very still deciding what happens next. They thought this document would be the end of the story, that I would sign it, take the money, and disappear. But they had underestimated me. Again. Because what they had just sent me wasn't a deal. It was the final straw, and I knew exactly what to do with it. The house was quiet when I stepped inside. I didn't bother turning on the lights. I walked straight to the back room, opened the closet, and pulled back the false panel behind the coats. The safe was where I had left it, tucked into the wall behind a shelf of tax binders no one ever touched. I spun the dial, entered the code, and pulled the door open. Inside, 2 external hard drives sat in a black velvet pouch like relics. I had labeled them plainly red and gray. I had started collecting the files 2 years ago. At first, it was just for peace of mind. I noticed things that didn't add up, numbers that seemed too clean, patterns in quarterly reports that defied logic, access logs that showed strange edits at odd hours. I wasn't trying to build a case then. I just wanted to understand. But as time went on, the questions grew louder. I stopped waiting for answers and started saving what I could. Emails, spreadsheets, call transcripts, memos with red flags that were ignored. Reports are altered just before board presentations. I never told anyone, not even IT. I encrypted everything, stored the originals off-network. Quiet, precise, methodical. And now here they were, proof that what I feared hadn't just been paranoia. It had been preparation. I carried the drives to my desk and plugged them into my personal laptop. The folders opened instantly, familiar and unnerving. I hadn't looked at them in months, hoping I'd never have to. But the moment I clicked through the directory, the memories came rushing back. Vendor contracts with inflated billing codes. Payment trails routed through dummy shell companies. Internal emails discussing how to adjust patient risk ratings to maximize insurance reimbursements. And my own flagged reports, the ones no one ever followed up on. I had been right. That was the part that hurt the most. Right to be suspicious, right to be cautious, but too late to stop what had already taken root. Still, it wasn't too late to act. I wasn't angry anymore, not in the loud, destructive sense. What I felt now was colder, sharper, like a scalpel. I had what they tried to bury, and I wasn't going to let it stay hidden, not this time. I didn't need coffee or music. The adrenaline alone kept me focused. It was past midnight when I opened the whistleblower portal on the Office of Inspector General's website. The submission form was long, clinical, and impersonal. but I knew exactly what to say. I attached a summary of my findings, followed by files that documented 2 years of deception emails, audit logs, manipulated billing records, and internal objections that were dismissed without response. I included the timeline of my termination, highlighting the suspicious precision of the timing. Before uploading, I sat still for a moment. My fingers hovered over the mouse. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't even personal anymore. It was about every nurse who stayed late to help a patient, while leadership siphoned money from Medicare. Every employee was laid off while executive bonuses soared. Every family that trusted Vernaxa with their loved one's care. I clicked submit. The screen blinked once, then confirmed receipt. Then I opened my email. I had drafts prepared. One to a health policy journalist I trusted, another to an investigative editor at a major outlet, and one to a medical ethics columnist who had once quoted me anonymously in a piece about whistleblower protections. Each message was calm, direct, and backed by evidence. I didn't include everything, just enough to get their attention. Enough to show this wasn't speculation. It was systemic, documented misconduct. I reviewed them twice, checked the attachments, the tone, and the clarity. Then I hit send. One, then the next, then the last. It was done. I leaned back and let the quiet fill the room. Outside, the wind moved through the trees. The city was sleeping, but something had shifted. I didn't feel fear. Not yet. I felt responsible, like something sacred had passed through me and now moved beyond me. Whatever came next wasn't just mine to carry. It belonged to truth and to consequence. This wasn't a dramatic moment. No spotlight, no applause. Just a middle-aged woman in sweatpants doing what needed to be done while the world wasn't watching. But sometimes, the smallest moments become the ones that matter most. And I had just set something in motion that they wouldn't be able to stop. At 7:13 a.m., the first call came in. A department head couldn't access the scheduling system. Patient appointments were blank. Files were missing. The system was asking for an override code, one that no longer existed. By 7:26, the issue had spread to the main hospital campus. Nurses were unable to input medication orders. Lab results were stuck in the queue. No one could update patient charts. A cascade of error messages flooded terminals across the network, each one tied to a digital key that had been revoked with my departure. By 7:41, executive leadership was scrambling. They had assumed they could reroute approvals through the CTO, but what they hadn't realized was that several legacy systems had never been migrated. I had been the only one with administrative access to the back-end authorizations. My removal didn't just create a gap, it triggered a lockdown. I sipped my coffee, slowly watching it unfold from my living room, where my phone lit up every few minutes with texts and voicemails. Some were confused, others panicked. No one had anticipated this level of disruption. Not because I was irreplaceable, but because no one had taken the time to understand the system I helped build. Doctors were locked out of surgical prep logs. Administrators couldn't authorize discharges. The radiology platform refused to boot without my encryption key. IT teams were working blind tracing protocols they had never seen before, protocols I had maintained and documented securely but not accessibly. By 8:15, an emergency task force was assembled. I wasn't invited, of course, but I didn't need to be. I had written the continuity plan, and they were now flipping through it like a Bible in a crisis. Page by page, chasing solutions I had once offered in meetings they hadn't bothered to attend. I didn't smile. Not really. But I felt something settle in me. Not satisfaction exactly, just a quiet knowing. They had cut me out without understanding what I held. Now they were learning the cost of that decision in real time, one lock screen at a time. This wasn't sabotage. I hadn't touched a single line of code since I left. But they had designed a system that depended on people they didn't value, and this was the consequence of that arrogance. Live and learn, or don't. Either way, the morning had only just begun. My phone rang at 9:03 a.m. The name flashed across the screen like a ghost, Jeff Lang. I let it buzz twice before answering, not out of pettiness, but because I wanted to start on my terms. His voice cracked slightly when he spoke, trying to sound composed but laced with urgency. He danced around the chaos, calling it a temporary systems disruption. Said it would be helpful if I could return for a day or two just to smooth things over. His tone shifted between friendly and transactional, as if he couldn't decide whether to flatter or bargain. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I told him I had already moved on. I no longer held any formal ties to Vernaxa. I could hear him scrambling, pulling out soft promises, consulting rates, potential reinstatement, the pension package reinstated in full. But his voice betrayed him. He wasn't offering a deal. He was begging for a lifeline. I let a pause hang in the air. Then I said no, not out of spite, but because I knew exactly what he was trying to do. He didn't want to fix what was broken. He wanted to cover it up before anyone noticed. I told him I had submitted everything I knew to the appropriate agencies, that I had done what was right, not what was convenient, and that whatever came next would not be decided in hushed backroom calls. He tried one last time, asking what it would take to bring me back. I told him the time for negotiation had passed. Then I ended the call. For the first time in years, I felt fully in control. And I didn't need a title or an office to feel that way. I just needed my voice. The call came just after sunset. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway, my voice still steady from the confrontation earlier that day. On the other end was Margaret Alden, chair of Vernaxa's board of directors. She didn't waste time. Her tone was different from what I expected, not corporate, not scripted. She told me she was calling not on behalf of the board, but as a woman who had watched something she believed in begin to unravel. She said she had voted to bring in Jeff Lang, that she had believed at the time in the promise of bold leadership and disruptive growth. But now she saw the damage clearly, not just in the headlines starting to circulate, but in the silence that had crept through the organization. The kind of silence that only grows when fear takes root. Then she asked the question, would I consider returning, not as a consultant, not as a fixer, but as an interim CEO to help rebuild what was left, to bring the company back to something close to what it was meant to be? I didn't answer right away. My first instinct was to say no. I didn't trust them. I didn't owe them anything. I had risked everything just to speak the truth. But Margaret kept speaking, and her voice didn't sound like someone trying to manage a crisis. It sounded like someone trying to make something right. She admitted her failures. She said the board had lost its way, that they needed someone who still knew what Vernaxa could be, not what it had become. I sat in silence after she finished. I thought about the employees who had confided in me over the years, the patients whose care had been shaped by policies I had helped write. I thought about the nurses still working double shifts while senior leadership collected bonuses. Part of me still didn't trust her. But another part, the part that hadn't quit even when I was pushed out, felt something stir. Maybe it wasn't about going back. Maybe it was about moving forward. I told her I would think about it. She said she understood. Then she added quietly that sometimes the hardest thing isn't exposing what's broken. It's staying to help fix it. I drove 2 hours north that evening past the city line out, where the air felt less like strategy meetings and more like perspective. My old mentor James still lived in the same modest house near the lake. He opened the door before I even knocked. We sat on his porch with mugs of strong black coffee like we had 100 times before. I told him everything. The call from the board, the offer to return, the weight of it all pressed on my chest like a decision I wasn't sure I wanted to own. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he asked me one question. Who are you loyal to? Not to the company, he clarified. Not to the structure, the name, or the paycheck. But to the people. To the patients, the nurses, and the young analysts who still believed in the work. That question sat with me longer than any speech could have. I thought about Carla, the analyst, who had seen me escorted out. About Margaret's voice trembling when she asked for help. About every moment I had wanted to quit, but hadn't because something in me still cared. I told James I was tired. He nodded, said that was the cost of caring. Then he said something I've never forgotten. You don't go back to save a system. You go back to save the people inside it. The wind shifted through the trees, and I realized I already knew what I would do. I wasn't returning for revenge, or for a title, I was returning for the quiet warriors, who kept showing up even when leadership failed them. Before I left, James pressed my hand and said he was proud. I didn't respond. I just looked out toward the lake, calm and still, and let the decision settle into me, like something that had always been there just waiting to be remembered. The boardroom was exactly as I had left it. Polished table leather chairs, muted artwork designed to look expensive, but say nothing. I stepped inside, not as a visitor, not as a casualty, but as the interim CEO. The room fell quiet. Margaret stood first. Her eyes met mine and gave the smallest nod. Others followed with stiff greetings, polite smiles masking unease. They hadn't expected me to say yes. Now they didn't know what to expect next. I didn't sit. I placed my folder on the table and spoke with a calm that surprised even me. I told them I was not here to stabilize stock prices. I was not here to clean up a PR mess or play savior to a broken institution. I was here to restore integrity, rebuild trust, and protect the people who gave this company its meaning. Then I listed my terms. Full executive authority with zero interference from the prior leadership. Immediate reinstatement of compliance oversight, including internal audit independence. Transparency on all financial matters published quarterly. A whistleblower hotline is routed outside the company. And a promise that anyone involved in fraudulent behavior would be held accountable no matter their title. There was silence, then questions, then pushback as expected. Some board members shifted in their seats, clinging to the illusion that business could return to normal. One called my conditions excessive. Another said I was emotional. I let them speak. Then I told them the truth. This wasn't about control. It was about survival. Without these terms, Vernaxa would not recover. Without change, the company would collapse under its own weight. Margaret backed me. Slowly, others followed. Not all with enthusiasm, but enough. The vote passed. I was officially in. Later that afternoon, I walked into the CEO's office. The air smelled faintly of aftershave and old decisions. I crossed the room, stood by the window, and looked out at the city. The view hadn't changed. But I had. I thought about the woman who had been escorted out 12 days ago. The one who had lost everything in an instant. And I thought about the people still inside these walls, waiting for someone to prove that leadership could be more than greed dressed in confidence. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt ready. Ready to make this place something worth believing in again. This time, I would not be a figurehead. I would be a force. And I would not apologize for doing what was right. As I placed my hand on the glass and watched the sky begin to shift colors, I said the words I hadn't dared believe for years. This time, I'll do it right.